Sounds good.
And then I'm going to broadcast. So are we ready?
Yep.
Okay. And 3, 2, 1.
So how will I be able to see, like, we have a good number of people to be able to start since my screen's up right here?
Let's see. We've got 7 attendees so far.
Okay. And I'll be able to see this once I'm off. Once they
You can
start
actually
sharing.
look at it now if you want. So hover over that black toolbar.
Okay. Participants.
And then, yep, you can click that. And if you open that in the chat box right now, it won't share with everyone else.
Okay.
So you don't have to worry about it interfering with your PowerPoint.
Okay. So over here. And then how do we get to that chat box? There we go. Okay. I'll just sit that over here. Attendees. Hello, everybody. We're just getting set up and giving folks a few minutes just to get logged in here. Quite a good group today participating. In the meantime, for those that are, we'll probably repeat this too. In the meantime, we will be taking questions through the chat function. So make sure you have that box up. And at the bottom of the box where it says to all panelists and where you can type the message, change that drop-down menu to all panelists and attendees. Then everybody can see the question being typed and asked, and for either me or Alex to respond to. So make sure you make that change at the bottom of the chat box to all panelists and attendees. It's about 12:02. I'll give folks about another minute and then I'll go ahead and get started. Thanks for popping on today. There's the hand raised.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Okay. I see that Bob has raised his hand. Bob, do you have a question? Type there to all panelists and attendees.
To access the chat function, all you need to do is hover your mouse at the bottom of your screen and a black toolbar will pop up, and then there's the little chat icon. You just have to click the little word bubble with the 3 dots and then your chat box will appear. At that point, you can change the to field to read all panelists and attendees as Roz was mentioning.
Okay, it's about 12:03. I'm going to get started just so we can stay within our time frame of an hour for today's webinar. My name is Roz Heilman. I'm the Executive Director with the Iowa Organic Association, and we are delivering a webinar today with Alex Heilman from Mercaris to talk about the organic markets. And I'm going to start the presentation off just talking a little bit about the Iowa Organic Association for those of you on the webinar who may be new to the organization or not very familiar with the work that we're doing. And then I will turn the presentation over to Alex and he can share the work that Mercaris is doing and take questions from you all. So again, for those of you just popped on, we will be taking questions through the chat feature. You can find that at the bottom of your screen. And make sure in the to option, you change that to all panelists and attendees so we can see everybody's questions. So I also want to thank Practical Farmers of Iowa and Maggie Norton for hosting today's webinar. They have been very helpful to facilitate this process today. So thank you, PFI and Maggie, and we'll go ahead and get started. Let's see. Okay, so the Iowa Organic Association was established in 2006 as a statewide nonprofit organization. We're committed to education, advocacy, and community cooperation, all focused around organic. And the mission of the organization is to advance organic agriculture and food systems Our membership includes a diverse community of Iowa's farmers, gardeners, food and farm businesses, advocates, and consumers who are devoted to supporting and expanding organic opportunities in Iowa. Our education activities focus on providing programs, expertise, and information to help expand and diversify organic opportunities in Iowa. We hope to raise awareness about organic production systems, the health benefits of organic food, the economic benefits of organic production, and environmental benefits of organic agriculture. We provide education opportunities through field days, workshops and webinars, and through research. One of our programs that we are delivering actually right now is called Growing Organic Expertise in Iowa. It is a grant that we received through the Sustainable Agriculture and Research and Education Program to deliver 20 workshops across Iowa through March 2021 to help increase the technical the expertise of technical service providers in Iowa in helping folks interested in transitioning or expanding or diversifying into organic. And last October, we delivered our first round of those workshops. We had 4 of them where we had 65 participants attend these workshops. Our next round is just starting to take place in February. You'll see the dates here on the PowerPoint. February 4th, Mason City, February 6th, Oakwood in Ames at the Oakwood Road Community Center, February 11th at the Fairfield Public Library, and February 18th in Council Bluffs. For more information about those trainings or to register or just get more information, you can go out to our calendar or our homepage and you can find some additional information about those workshops that we're offering. The next program that we are getting ready to do is the 2nd annual Midwest Organic Pork Conference. We will be holding that March 13th through 14th in Dubuque, Iowa at the Hotel Julian. For more information about the pork conference, you can go to midwestorganicporkconference.org. And the purpose of the Organic Pork Conference is to encourage greater research and expansion of the organic pork market. IOA delivered the first conference ever organized in the United States dedicated to presenting the best resources and information available for organic pork and niche pork opportunities. So if you're interested in learning more about that, I encourage you to go out on our website and take a look at last year's program, and we're starting to pull together the final details for this year's agenda. Our outreach opportunities, we try to get out to as many conferences or trade shows to raise awareness about our organization and the work we're doing in Iowa. Examples are we attend the Iowa Organic Conference every year, looking forward to heading to Moses at the end of February and participating in Practical Farmers of Iowa's conference that just took place last weekend. O-Grain is coming up this weekend, so just trying to get out there as much as possible and make those connections with folks interested in learning more about organic. We also provide a web calendar on our website that includes organic programs IOA is putting on, but as well as other folks around Iowa and the Midwest, just to get that information out to our supporters. We do a bi-monthly e-newsletter, just keeping folks connected to organic issues and programs. And we do have a social media, we're on all the social media channels, and we have an Iowa Organic listserv. So if you'd like to connect to any of those opportunities, you can head out onto our website at iowaorganic.org, and on our homepage you can find a way to connect through those different modes. And moving on. In 2018, we produced the first Iowa Organic Resource Directory, which includes over 900 businesses, nonprofits, educators, and service providers, where folks can look for information, whether they're looking to transition, expand, diversify, or just look for opportunities related to organic. This resource is available online on our website. And just a heads up, we are almost finalizing a revision after that first run, and we will be updating that online and having some additional hard copies available as well. So we'll put that information out on our newsletter as soon as those are available. Community building is an important aspect of our organization, connecting mentors to farmers or others interested in learning more, and finding opportunities to just build that community and provide those resources. We have an annual meeting every late fall. We provide that kind of community opportunity through field days, the farmer-to-farmer mentorship opportunities. And additionally, we utilize the listserv and the outreach opportunities to help expand that community. Advocacy, focusing on organic policy at a state level as well as a national level is an important aspect of the organization. We want to unify the voice for organic interests. It's important for us to be developing relationships with policy leaders. That's from all the way to the local level, state level, national level. So just to be having those conversations about the importance of organic and supporting those practices. And then IOA wants to be able to mobilize our supporters and advocates, so we're kind of all speaking the same message and on the same page about how we can move organic interests forward in the state of Iowa. Right now, we're in the throes of our annual membership appeal. If you are interested in supporting the work that we're doing, I encourage you to also go out on the website and look at our different membership opportunities. Memberships definitely help us continue to do the work and making the connections and providing the programs and resources to really help organic grow in the state of Iowa. So if you have questions or you just want to talk a little bit more about what we're doing as an organization, you can reach me at my phone number, 515-608-8622, or through email at roz@iowaorganic.org. And I welcome an opportunity to meet you and talk with you. So if this would be a great time, if you guys had any specific questions about Iowa Organic Association, I'll go ahead and address those. And if not, I will turn the presentation over to Alex Heilman with Mercaris, and he'll give you a little bit of a background, his background, and talk to you about Mercaris, and we'll hear questions from you. So thank you for listening to that bit of presentation, and I look forward to turning it over to Alex.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Roz. So 1 second here while we get my screen up and rolling. Oops. 1 moment here. Sorry, my apologies. Here we go. All right, we're in action now. So thank you again, Roz, so much for that introduction, brief overview of the Iowa Organic Association. It's an honor to present here, and I really appreciate being invited. So my name is Alex Heilman. I'm the Director of Sales at Mercaris. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to give a little bit of a background on myself and Mercaris. And then I'm going to give a presentation kind of reviewing what's currently happening in the organic market in North America, and then talk about some contracting efficiency specifically for farmers. I do want to keep this conversation, pretty conversational. So if you have questions along the way, I do invite you to submit them through within that chatbot function, and I will make a valiant attempt to make sure I can answer every single one of them. All right. So to discuss Mercaris, who and what we are. We're first and foremost a data service. And I'll get into a bit of the logistics on, how we structure our data, how we gather it, et cetera. But what we have done is we essentially stood up the largest organic and non-GMO market survey in North America to directly shed some transparency on what's happening in the organic market space as a means of supporting the industry and also pressing for more growth. In addition to doing a lot of tracking and publishing market commentary, we're also an active trading platform, directly connecting buyers and sellers, whether that's a farmer with a consumer packaged good company or anyone kind of along that supply chain directly. So my background specifically, I came from a bit of a diverse background, actually. I started my career kind of always centered around food. I worked for about 10 years actually in restaurants across North America, mostly in New York and San Francisco, which just kind of always led me right back to ag. So with that, then I kind of pivoted my trajectory. I worked for a large milling company for a number of years, booking futures and working directly with clients. And while I was at that company, I met Kelly James, who was starting to launch Mercaris. Kelly is our founder and CEO. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar. She is very well connected across the industry. Through meeting her, then I was offered the opportunity to join Mercaris and help to build this platform. And I've always been all about more analysis around organic foods and how organic food production aligns across, especially across North America. So I joined about 4.5 years ago. Currently the director of sales, and so I work very closely with everyone from farmers looking for additional marketing opportunities or some general pricing analysis, all the way through to banks and consumer packaged good companies who are really taking deep dive analysis and doing it with large teams to either further invest in the industry or create new emerging market tools. So with that bit of a background out of the way, I'm going to discuss a little bit more kind of about Mercaris's tools and how we structure this and what we're tracking. So we currently track organic and non-GMO corn, organic and non-GMO soybeans, and organic wheat. Those tend to be our big 3 markets, and we're starting to now to expand our survey to also track additional markets around pulses, oil seeds, meal markets, and additional feed drivers in particular across livestock markets as well. Our bread and butter is very much so focused around tracking prices. However, you can't look at the organic market without also looking at imports and how that has a direct pressure on domestic pricing. So a large pillar of what we track and what we publish as well centers specifically around organic imports, everything from where they're coming from, what the port of destination is, etc., all the way through to who's doing those imports. It tends to be a bit of a risky subject to talk about just because so many people have opinions on imports and sometimes the validity of them. But regardless, it's still of vital importance to track those markets, see where it's coming from, and essentially try to build a wall to prevent imports from coming in and really directly affecting domestic prices for farmers. I briefly also mentioned that we're an online trading platform. And what we do and how we structure that is we directly work with buyers and sellers. So we do invite farmers to reach out to us. We do have a truckload minimum, just as kind of a baseline requirement. So please do keep that in mind as you reach out to us. And what we then are able to do is either do a kind of a direct trade lineup where we'll essentially connect you directly with one buyer. Or in some instances, we're able to also host online auctions where we're able to pull multiple participants to the table to really kind of get into true price discovery and understand, kind of how that bid stack affects then actual traded prices. And anytime we are able to get a trade done through that mechanism, it's always kind of our preferred method of doing so. But we always want to just be very transparent and always invite multiple participants to that table. With auctions, one other thing to note is that we do, we charge historically low fees. So while we do have a bit of a fee structure in place there, we're charging 20 cents per bushel split between the buyer and seller. So 10 cents on each side, and that's for organic. And for non-GMO trades, it's just 10 cents a bushel, again, split between the buyer and seller, so a nickel on each side of the table. So sourcing our data, how do we actually build these pricing surveys? What are we collecting? What's the frequency? So to this day, we are the most robust organic market survey in North America to date. What we've done is we've built direct relationships with first purchasers of grain across the US and Canada. Currently, that tends to be, elevators, mills, or anyone that's doing direct purchasing with a large grower subset or through brokers. Right now, we have about 50 first handlers that are participating in the survey. And what they do is we, sign non-disclosure agreements. They share with us all of their trade details, so volume, price, delivery, location, etc. And from there, what we're able to do is pull everything together and publish a volume-weighted average price across, both nationally and then also across regions. We then are able to kind of subsect that data additionally to show some of the differences between, food versus feed pricing, spot versus forward contracting, and some regional analysis as well. Again, with the true intention of just building as much transparency as we possibly can into what's otherwise been a very opaque market. One of the things to note as well is that depending on which contract you're looking at that we're tracking, We are encompassing, pretty large, robust numbers within our trades. I'm sorry, not our trades, but the trades that we capture within the survey. So if you're looking at, corn and soybeans, we encompass roughly 25% of the total domestic market, which is, shockingly a really large number to capture within any sort of pricing survey. All right, so that's a little bit of a background on the data sets and how we aggregate it. Again, I will continue to open this up to questions along the way. This now brings us to, kind of the meat of this presentation, being the market overview. So I did want to just kind of quickly start by talking about, what is really different about organic versus conventional, from the lens of a farmer that's essentially transitioning, or a company that hasn't really had much exposure in the organic space, and things that you need to note and take consideration of. So 3 years of transition, for a lot of you, this is, pretty cut and dry. Yes, absolutely. However, it can be a really difficult undertaking, both financially and also logistically. You need to look at new essential farm management techniques. You need to look at new and potentially different inputs as well. And also, tracking organic certification and making sure that all of your paperwork is in order. So just being very diligent about that is of utmost interest to anyone transitioning. Then on the processing side, there's a whole number of differences between the organic and conventional market, but a few things to just kind of touch on really quickly. Storage availability tends to be a drastically different market between organic and conventional. A lot of times relying directly on on-farm storage, so that potentially leads to an additional cost directly to the farmer, or trying to find a storage facility that specifically does have segregated bins directly for organic. Can be a large hurdle, and also seeing if it's within any sort of geographic area close to the farm. Beyond that as well, consistent organic raw commodity supply from the lens of a buyer is also quite a hurdle. It's oftentimes, even more difficult to set a forward contract in play to guarantee supply for years to come, let alone just the next upcoming marketing year. So that tends to also be a pretty big limiting factor and large risk exposure opportunity. And then transportation can also be a bit of a nightmare. Whether, again, that's looking at different facilities or different transportation companies that, again, are, do have organic certifications and do have direct, dedicated transport for organics in particular. So that's kind of just on the production and processing side. Then when it comes to risk exposure, financial risk management tools are pretty, non-existent when it comes to the organic space. There are some organic crop insurance programs available. However, the mechanisms for tracking that can be quite difficult as well. A lot of times when those insurance providers want to look at, 5-year average pricing or understand like a 5-year time horizon in the future for what they can expect, it's tremendously more challenging to get to those numbers in the organic space than it is for conventional. And then also for farmers, looking at organic operating loans, very few banks are currently offering them. Or offering anything at a favorable rate. We are working directly with some of the players right now to try to address this a little bit more. And actually, every day, I pretty much hear kind of a new party interested in looking at this challenge. And I think that this is going to be an opportunity that we're going to see more and more players come into in the coming years. And then lastly, 2 quick points as well on the risk side, looking at organic policy issues. Whether that be fraud issues, collective tracking, et cetera, it can also be a large deterrent for entering the organic market in the first place. So to now look at some of the macro factors that have affected essentially the last crop year and this year as well. 2020, we had a really, really terrible year when it comes to planting. We had a very wet spring with, delayed or no planting. And throughout the year, the weather offered pretty much no apology for what was happening across the planting conditions, which then led to, delayed 2019 harvest. I even heard this statistic just yesterday that I think 70% of all of North Dakota's crop, organic and conventional, mind you, is still in the field. So 2019 was just a super unrelenting year across all agriculture. Overall, the number of certified field crop farms did grow in the 2019 to 2020 year, We saw about 11,600 year-over-year growth, which is fantastic. We're about to publish our next acreage estimates here in a couple weeks, so keep your eyes and ears peeled for that. But mid to late February, we will have updated final numbers essentially for the 2019 crop year. Now looking on the demand side of things, for some macro factors, livestock feed demand was essentially flat across 2019. Consumer demand is still very much so there. However, we have not seen huge increases essentially in that feed demand driver to increase tons of production. And then U.S. consumers, again, are continuing to demand these products. It tends to be a little bit more of a logistics and supply chain question for getting those products marketed into the consumer directly. So to jump into look at some prices as well, and organic premiums in particular. And I put this up here because I really wanted to highlight directly what the average organic premium is over conventional, and to kind of highlight how that has changed over the course of the last 4 years, roughly. So when looking at organic corn, we've seen, this is last year, so 2018, 2019. But we were seeing roughly averaged over the last 4 years, a $5.75 per bushel premium over the conventional contract for organic corn in particular. For organic soybeans, that premium is higher. It's at about $10.18 per bushel. Again, still exceeding 100% of the conventional market. So just by tracking organic premiums, you can see that this is still an incentive essentially for growing organic, is that premium, is holding over time. Feed is the greatest demand driver. Even though feed demand has essentially been flat, it still makes up the majority of the demand for organic grains in particular. Food use, the demand is there, the premium is even larger. However, the majority of the crop does go directly into feed markets. Now, as for organic corn supply and outlook, so production across 2019 did decline slightly, with yields also coming down. A lot of this truly had to do with a really wet spring and farmers having delayed planting, getting the crop actually in the ground. So I would expect some of these numbers, depending on weather condition, to start to rebound a bit in the 2020 forward. So within 2020, I would, continue to expect to see U.S. production increase directly without kind of the deterrent of the 2019 weather condition. However, there are still indications right now that we're potentially set up for another wet spring here, which is terrible. The last thing we was 2 years in a row of really terrible planting conditions, but something to note on that we do still expect to see a bump in U.S. production. Now, as for corn prices, so this is us mapping out essentially what national organic corn prices have been for the course of the last 5 years, roughly. And while prices have been pretty deflated, we did see a bit of a rebound in 2018, with prices then leveling out kind of across 2019. And then coming into 2020, which I'll get into here in just a moment, we did see feed prices, start to lagger, but with food grade prices increasing quite significantly. And a lot of that does actually have to do directly with the demand equation. Looking on the right-hand side here, here's a bar chart that's displaying what the spread essentially has been for organic price as a range. So we did see about a 90-cent range across 2019, which shrank from some of the prior years. So as for current prices, current feed grade prices, the last few prices I've seen were about $8.61 for feed grade organic corn, which, defying expectations, the feed grade organic commodity price, were pretty tepid over the last quarter of 2019. Prices remained quite volatile in December and dipped pretty significantly from the prior year. Delivered organic corn feed prices averaged, $8.63 per bushel, which was down by about a quarter from the prior November, and down nearly $1 per bushel from the prior year. So in contrast to feed grade commodities, however, the markets for organic food grade corn and soybeans have been, relatively bullish. So over Q4 of 2019, food grade organic corn prices were up by about $1.13 per bushel from the prior year, holding at about $12.83 per bushel. However, the most recent price I did see come through for the month, or within the month of January, for food grade corn was still quite suppressed. However, I would like to see more data come through, but we saw it trade in at just under $11 per bushel. As for total U.S. organic corn acres, again, I briefly mentioned that production was down, and we will have updated numbers here coming out in about 4 weeks. But we did see the number of certified organic operations harvesting corn grow 8% year over year, with the top 5 states being Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, Oregon, and New York, specifically for organic corn. Due to fewer acres directly from 2019, the largest losers across the U.S. Were within the Corn Belt directly. Michigan, Ohio, Minnesota, and Wisconsin harvested organic corn acres are declined by a combined rough estimate of about 9,700 acres. So now, looking at corn imports, which I know can be a bit of a heated topic, we have seen some momentum regaining directly for corn imports. They were on pace to reach about 6 million bushels for 2019-2020, which increased slightly from the prior year. Again, a lot of that is directly due to those poor spring planting conditions and less crop directly available. Organic corn imports from Romania and the Black Sea region, did increase year over year by about a little over 100%, and then imports directly from Canada followed quite closely with about 120% year-over-year growth. The last month of 2019 in December, we did see organic cracked corn imports decrease. However, I would still keep an eye specifically on that Black Sea region, as oftentimes those imports pick up in the summer months. So just one thing to also continue to note. Now, shifting over to organic soybean supply outlook, we did see a 14% year-over-year decline. So we saw just about 7 million bushels from a U.S. production standard. Imports, again, continue to build. You can see then soybean meal being kind of the dominant. A couple of years ago, mostly we were importing directly whole soybeans. However, we've shifted to a bit more of a model where now we're seeing more meal imports coming into the country. And a lot of that has to do with the U.S. having a hard time figuring out a steady supply or an offtake partner for soybean oil, specifically on the organic side of the equation. So continuing to watch then for 2020, similar to corn, a jump in production, again, depending on the weather, but we would expect to see 2020 plantings grow by about 10 million bushels. Current organic soybean prices are quite stable. The last feed indication I saw was at $19.07 per bushel. Current food indication is at about $21.60, so maintaining quite well. And looking at this graph in particular, what this is highlighting essentially is how that premium structure has maintained over the last 4 years. So even though we've seen prices, be depressed and come down, the premium has held. So in that instance, the organic market did somewhat follow suit in the suppression of the overall conventional prices as well. But it is important to note, and truly this is a continued, opportunity for U.S. farmers to see that premium structure is safe and in place for organics. So similar to the prior chart that we looked at for corn, this is showing, what the national organic soybean price has been over the last 5 or 6 years, roughly. Following again with that conventional bearish prices, we did see, things start to come down with a brief rebound period in 2018 and early 2019. And price range, similar as well to corn, it did shrink quite drastically. So there's just about a 20-cent range. Now, looking at total U.S. organic soybean acres, the top 5 states are Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, Oregon, and New York. Similar to corn, Mercaris estimates that U.S. producers will harvest a record just over 200,000 acres of organic soybeans in 2019. However, that is down by about 8% from 2018. The number of certified organic operations harvesting soybeans did grow by about 4% though from 2018. And now we're looking at about 2,651 operations that are actually handling organic soybeans. Looking at soybean imports, I slightly mentioned that there was a bit of a shift in momentum with whole bean imports, trending down, and now the industry preferring to import directly organic soybean meal. The bottom line is that we grew about 21% of our needs and imported the remaining roughly 80%, 60% of that being meal, 40% of that being whole beans. The slower pace of organic soybean meal imports is worth keeping an eye on, though. If organic soybean meal imports fall below current Mercaris expectations, then the volume of organic soybeans used for crush and meal production domestically is likely to escalate as a result. And if this happens, the U.S. organic soybean supplies will become much tighter, adding significant bullish price support to the market. So shifting now to look at winter wheat, we'll also briefly address spring wheat as well. The number of organic operations harvesting wheat reached about 2,000, a little over this year, which was a 4% increase from the prior year. Mercaris estimated U.S. harvested organic wheat acres to increase by about 4%, as I mentioned, coming in at just under 600,000 acres. Organic wheat harvested area is expected to expand this year again. Predictions currently at about a 4% year-over-year growth. Primarily in the past year, that expansion of 4% was due mostly to the number of organic operations harvesting wheat in Montana specifically. Harvested wheat acres across the Corn Belt are expected to decline this year, as wheat production in the region has suffered many of the same setbacks as corn and soybeans, however. Looking at spring wheat here, production is expected to reach a record-setting 4.7 million bushels, up 13% from the prior year. These are excellent growth statistics, absolutely. It's relying on increased acreage, and we're expecting to see about a 14% growth from the prior year. Now, addressing some of the organic wheat prices, feed wheat prices averaged about $8.99 per bushel in December. It lost about $1.10 per bushel from the previous month, and roughly $2 per bushel from the prior year. So that was a bit pricing and import discussion. Now I do want to talk directly about some contracting mechanisms. So common contracting arrangements for organic. So oftentimes when I talk directly with growers, the opportunity that we always suggest, which is granted harder to find, is a forward contract mechanism. Typically that is saved and reserved for food grade markets in particular. However, the demand is there, and if you can get into one of those programs directly, I highly suggest looking at that. The other common contracting mechanism, as I'm sure a lot of you are very familiar with, is no contract and just doing direct spot trades. And depending on the year, that can be a very effective strategy. I always recommend, trying to get a mix of different contract mechanisms in place so that you can take some of the upside potential for spot contracts, depending on the different time of year. However, locking anything in place through a forward contract is highly suggested. However, there can be a lot of limitations to that, specifically around, local buyers. What's your local market? Are the local mills full, etc. But we at Mercaris do a pretty good job of trying to start to track some of this. So keep posted. And actually at the end of this, I'm going to invite everyone to sign up for Mercaris's farmer account, free to everyone who is a farmer, as another tool for essentially starting to track, both pricing information, market commentary, and potential for organic, marketing opportunities. So real quickly then, just kind of closing this up, looking at forward contract variations. So there are, bushel contracts and acreage contracts. I directly outlined, what the definitions are of these two directly on that slide. So I'm not going to read that. I'm going to let you all kind of take a good stab at that there. However, I did just want to point out really quickly that acre contracts tend to be a lot less risky to the grower, which I outlined a bit here as well. However, they are much less common. So another mechanism to keep in place as you're negotiating with your local buyers. It's also important to talk about avoiding a rejected load as well, because this is a problem that we do see quite often, specifically with new growers who are transitioning or recently transitioned to organic. always, always, always get your organic certification paperwork in order and ensure that your buyer has a current copy of your organic certification for any sort of crops that are about to be delivered. I highly recommend as well doing quality tests, directly with any sort of mill or on-farm testing for crop specifications, highly recommended. And also, as a kind of a third takeaway, is always obtain a discount schedule as well. It's horrible when we see a contract delivery kind of blow up because of a lack of a discount schedule in place. So I cannot stress enough how important it is to get that structure based. So now, real quickly, what to watch for in 2020 and beyond, and some direct insights. So things to know about marketing organic grain, there's tons of competition from foreign markets. Truly, the organic grain market in North America is hugely global. A lot of the buyers rely not just on domestic production, but also imports to meet their supply needs. However, they always tend to prefer working directly with US growers. And it's not uncommon for us to hear of a buyer who only wants to source from domestic producers. A lot of that has to do with traceability, quality specs, etc., and wanting to also kind of highlight how their supply chains reflect and support North American farmers. So for anyone who is a grower, this is an opportunity for you to really push that opportunity. Rising demand and consumer demand in general, does yield good prices, but quality, again, and obtaining a discount schedule still really, really matters. And then lastly, fewer certified organic grain handlers and facilities, as you would naturally expect with this being a bit of an emerging market still, is, a huge challenge. So, knowing who your local markets are, constantly doing research, talking to your neighbors, finding new buyers and sellers, etc., does put the homework and the responsibility on you, the grower, to find that. But again, talk to companies, talk to us. There's tons of free resources out there to specifically address who some of these buyers are. So just really take the time to educate yourself. So now for some insights into 2020. As I did kind of briefly mention, we are seeing widening spread in food versus feed grade markets. The 2019's challenge of growing conditions did tighten the market for food grade organic commodities, resulting in higher prices directly. And unfortunately for growers, and for the reasons just briefly highlighted, feed grade commodities have yet to find similar support. However, widening margins may be an indicator of higher prices for feed grade commodities in the near future. Particularly as the market settles back into 2020, buyers are looking for new stock, new supplies, and also want to address 2019's reduced crop production. The market is still quite bullish on food grade grains. So, in contrast to what I just talked about for food grade commodities, food grade corn and soybeans, we are seeing more demand for, more rise. So over Q4 of 2019, food grade average corn was about $12.83 per bushel, up by about $1.13 from the prior year. Food grade soybeans were very similarly bullish, so keep an eye on that, and if you can, always try to grow for a food grade market. Another thing that I briefly mentioned prior was tracking Black Sea imports. So our reliance on them domestically is unlikely to change. And while we currently have seen some suppressed import numbers directly out of that region from the beginning half year of January and also December, we would expect those numbers to again start to rise, come the summer months and the end of spring. So imports, still have tons of time to rebound and push higher again, which again, we really want to support domestic farmers and growers. And so everything we do is we want to equip you with more knowledge, more tools to, again, kind of build a wall against these imports and really push domestic acres higher. And then lastly, just tracking food and egg imports as well as an insight. We saw, and this came directly from Egg Funder, which is a fantastic resource, but we did see a 43% year-over-year increase in investments directly in the food and egg community. So 16.9 billion roughly in 2018. This again is a further signal of just seeing what the market's demanding and where the market's headed to go. So for me, seeing that indication essentially of that much of a growth directly in those investments was present is further indication that we're going to continue to see demand and potentially demand increases. So after those insights, again, I do welcome all farmers to, sign up for a free Mercaris account. I'm not trying to sell you anything here, but if you go to mercaris.com/farmers, you'll essentially find a page there that allows farmers to sign up for a free account where we'll give you an organic producers report bi-weekly. So again, help you really kind of get a pulse on what we're seeing across prices, imports, and also some commentary. So I welcome all of you to please sign up for that. So with that, that was my presentation on what we're seeing for current marketing conditions. Thank you again to the Iowa Organic Association, and I will open it up to some questions.
Alex, this is Roz. Did you see there were a couple questions over in the chat side?
Yes, sorry, I'm pulling those up right now. My apologies.
No problem.
Okay, so I saw a question here, how much smaller is the food grade market versus the feed grade for corn and soybeans? I will kind of refer back, and actually I'm happy to share my presentation as well, but roughly we see, again, this is very rough, but I would say about a quarter of the demand equation goes towards food use and residual, and then about 75% for corn and soybeans, again, rough ballpark estimates, tend to be direct drivers into the feed grade market. Sorry, another question here. So someone asked, how low are our prices going to drop over the next 5 years? Commenting directly on fraud, etc. Good question. I, wish I had a better answer for you. But what I will say is that I think it's critical for tracking historicals and pricing historicals in general to start to get an indication of where prices are headed. Within some of our tools, we will track forward contracts as well. And so I think that tends to be a bit of a good indication for, 2-year outlooks. 5 years tend to be quite hard, but what I would recommend, again, is just kind of taking a look at what we're seeing for direct influences, also what's happening across proxy markets, whether that be other grains, small grains, etc., and where consumer demand is coming from. So sorry, I can't directly answer that question. Wish I could, but that's kind of the best I can offer there. All right, sorry, looks like we have a few hand raises. 1 second here. Yes, Bob, sorry, I'm going to allow you to ask your question here. 1 moment. You are open. All right, go for your question, Bob.
I'm sorry, I just mistakenly hit the raise hand.
Oh, no, no worries. Any other questions?
There's an add-on at the bottom to that first question.
1 moment here. All right, so sorry, the question is how demand for organic feed is calculated or estimated. So feed demand is based off of livestock herd size, also what that average consumption statistic is per animal as well, and then overall what that market size is. That's how we back in directly to that feed demand number as an estimate. Then also there was a question in there attached directly to livestock. I will, it looks like this is from Rizoma. I will directly connect with you after that. I have a few different, tables I can essentially show you that break out the differences in livestock drivers. I'm so happy to address that offline here. It looks like we also got another question here. Why are imports coming from the Black Sea region? Good question. And oftentimes what we see, and this is kind of where we shed a little bit of a light, is that there tends to be more activity across Black Sea region when it comes to further processing grains. meaning corn will be sent across different regions to, Turkey or Romania in particular. And then from there, they'll be further processed. And then what's shipped out essentially is a new product, quote unquote, that is then further processed within Turkey or Romania in particular, and then shipped to the United States. So the reason why we see imports coming out of there is that there are a few players here who are doing that as a means of essentially cracking that corn to change a bit of the origin, but also then to kind of take a cheaper product and feed it into the domestic feed markets. So that tends to be a lot of the reason around why we see more activity around the Black Sea region. Another question here. So 5 years from now, what are the other than corn, soybeans, and wheat that end users will want produced? That's a great question. So, we see a lot of demand right now for alternative protein sources. So pea markets are very, very hot right now. A lot of that volume comes out of Canada, but some of the northern climates are also very apt for growing organic peas to feed directly into those protein markets. We are seeing more push for smaller grains as well. A lot of that comes from wanting crops and wanting to be able to essentially do whole rotation contracting. So then not just looking at offtake partners specifically for that corn and soybeans, but the other crops that are available within that organic rotation. So I see, from both, seed companies all the way through to some of the food companies wanting to essentially understand how they could, look at that as another sustainability metric. Another question here. You showed that the price range in pricing is decreasing over the years. Can you unpack that? Settling into more stable pattern, how much room for variation does this leave in future years? Yeah, fantastic question. So the price range, it does definitely has decreased over the last 5 years. And a lot of that truly actually is a corollary effect from the conventional commodity markets also being quite suppressed. So we're not seeing tons of demand, not even demand, sorry, that's the wrong word to use here. We're not seeing tons of essentially activity to support the growth of that just yet. We're starting to see parts of those markets rebound. And again, specifically that the food grade markets are rebounding currently at a bit of a quicker pace than the feed grade. So is there a stable pattern? Good question. No, there currently is not a stable pattern. It's kind of hard to follow anything through a complete downgrade essentially over the course of the last 5 years roughly. So I would very much so look at this as a holistic view of commodity markets, and that kind of supports some of those ideas. What I did highlight though as well was that organic premium, even through the suppressed times that we've seen from 2013 to current, has maintained. So, I mean, that again is further indication that organic truly does have a place at the table because consumers are still prioritizing that. So even though the overall price has come down, that price premium has maintained. All right, any other questions here?
I think we might be close.
Yeah.
Well, for those participating today, we are going to make the webinar available on our website. So we'll send that information out in an e-news. Additionally, I'll be following up with all of you to take a very short online survey just to get some feedback on the presentation, both for both Alex and my benefit, but at the same time, we have some feedback to our grantors about the programs that we are presenting with their funds. So if you could be so helpful in responding to those, that short survey, that would be very helpful. And if you need additional information offline and like to reach out to me, please feel free, roz@iowaorganic.org. And Oh, Wendy had a quick question for you too at the bottom, if you want to grab that real quick.
Yeah. Yeah, so question on whole rotation contracting. So I can talk about this ever so briefly. So we're starting to see, it's a relatively new idea. There's not a ton of companies that are starting to offer this, but it is something that we're seeing both on the the processor consumer packaged goods side of the equation starting to demand, as well as an opportunity to really highlight some of those as sustainability metrics. So what that tends to mean is it's an acreage contract that is set in place essentially on per acre basis to then contract whatever is grown. So, those can take a number of different shapes as well, but those tend to be reserved specifically then for food grade growers, or someone who's working with like a livestock company, et cetera, that then is going to want potentially different demand sources. So it's a relatively new idea. We're starting to see more companies start to take a serious look at it. Happy to connect with you, Wendy, after this as well to kind of highlight who some of those companies are. But it's a really fascinating idea of essentially continuing to support the growth of transition to organic through a model then that supports all rotational crops and not just placing the dollar value on corn or soybeans. Looks like we got one more question come through from Brian. He asks, what, if anything, are you doing with organic integrity given both foreign and U.S. producers who are trying to cheat the U.S. system on integrity? Yeah, I mean, great question, Brian, absolutely. And this is something that I field quite often. So currently there is a push essentially for there to be better tracking mechanisms in place to prevent fraud from an import standard. So a lot of that right now is essentially we're going to have to rely on policy essentially to address part of that. However, in the meantime, and this is a space where more and more of the buyers are really kind of in control of the power here, is truth in who you're purchasing from, and also highly vetting your sources as well. So we can't just ask this to be just a policy play. And rely on government to fix this. This has to be an instance essentially where the industry is willing to self-police a little bit. I'm not saying go crazy with that idea, but from a buyer's perspective, you do want to have truth in origin. You do want to be able to highlight your supply chain and how sustainable it is. So anymore, looking at those cheap imports, some of that blame falls directly on the buyer then. When it comes to the imports. When it comes to then direct grown, potentially fraudulent grain within the US, we've seen, I'm sure you've all followed some of these cases here, but we've seen essentially more and more pressure on essentially, and stricter consequences for anyone who is actively cheating the market. So I think it's a little bit less of a risk factor than it was maybe 5 or 10 years ago. But again, this truly falls back on some of the buyers. All right, well, I think that potentially wraps up all the questions. We're basically at the top of the hour. But if anyone else does have questions, feel free to call or email me directly. My email is alex.heilman, spelled Heilman, at mercaris.com. And you can call me directly at area code 347-522-0631. All right, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Alex. And thanks for everybody for tuning in today. And we will follow up. Have a great day.
Thanks, you too.